And we'll now start the formal part of the meeting, and the webcast should be started. Okay, thank you. Item 1, the minutes of previous meetings. We have the minutes of the annual council meeting held on the 10th of May and the extraordinary council meeting which took place on the 24th of May. Are you agreed that I can sign these as a correct record? Agreed. Thank you very much. I will sign them later. Mr. Taylor, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are apologies from councillors Kevin Denis, Brian Ellis, Patricia Ellis, Jed Hall, Jill Hargreaves, Nicholas Holder, Denise Legale, Peter Martin, Kika Miralese, Sam Pritchard, Wyatt Ramsdale, Simon Thornton and Ross Welland.
Thank you very much. And Leader?
Councillor Edwards is away on holiday and it should have been notified. Thank you.
If we're notifying in that case, I think Peter Martin is also away. Declarations of interest. In accordance with the Waverley Code of Conduct, do members have any non-pecuniary or disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? Have there any been declared, Mr. Taylor?
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Mary Forozewski has declared a non-pecuniary interest in Executive Minute number 31 regarding the local plan as Chairman of Cranley Parish Council, former Chairman and continuing member of the Cranley Parish Planning Committee.
Are there any other declarations? Councillor Lear?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to declare an interest in item 37 of the executive minutes, the intention to appropriate land at Bourne Recreation Ground, as I am actually the chairman of the Bourne Asset Community Group. Thank you.
Councillor Frost?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Any item involving Surrey County Council, as I am a Surrey County Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Nazir? Sorry, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, moving on. Mayor's announcements. I've got 400 pieces of paper and I've got to find the right one. Since I started as Mayor, I've had a reasonably busy time. I've no idea how many Mike did in the first few months, but I've covered 66 events since I became Mayor, ranging from the sublime to the ridiculous. One of the best was last Saturday evening when I went to Weydon School for a performance of Les Miserables, which was absolutely fantastic. And tomorrow I'm unveiling a cow outside the in Godalming High Street. I've cut turf for new council houses in Hazelmere. I've been with the Lord Lieutenant for the presentation of Queen's Awards and so on. It's been a very varied and interesting few months. Recently, Alan Crawley, who was here earlier, conducted the civic service for Waverley in the parish church in St George's in Badshot Lee, and that I enjoyed thoroughly, and those of you who came, thank you very much. In regard to the charities that I'm supporting this year, I have a friend. I'm not up to cycling anymore, but I have a friend who's going to ride the Prudential 100-mile ride on the 31st of July. And if anybody feels like sponsoring him, I would be very grateful. That's the end of my announcements. Thank you very much. Questions from members of the public. One question has been received, and that is from Mr. Lees.
Mr. Mayor, councillors, during the reviews and discussions of the draft local plan, the provision and funding of required infrastructure essential to support delivery of the local plan has come up on a number of occasions. An infrastructure delivery plan has been referred to and has only just become available. In order to encourage development, the government has extended the Garden Towns and Cities scheme to encompass garden villages. The Garden Villages scheme provides for new freestanding and sustainable developments in the 1,500 to 10,000 house size. Certainly from a size, if not a sustainable perspective, it would appear this Garden Village scheme is targeted at developments such as that proposed at Dunsfold Aerodrome. Although the scheme closes for applications on July 31st, it has been open since March this year. Has Waverley Borough Council submitted the proposed Dunsfold Aerodrome development for inclusion in the Garden Villages scheme in order to benefit from some of the government infrastructure money that would accompany a successful application? And if they have not, then why haven't they done so, and what alternative funded plans are in place to provide the required infrastructure? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lees. I'll ask the Leader of the Council to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Lees, for your question. Yes, council officers are actually in the process of preparing an expression of interest in relation to the government's Garden Villages scheme, and this relates to the Dunsfold Aerodrome settlement. This recognises that a settlement for 2,600 dwellings and a retained and expanded business park with around 26,000 square metres of additional employment and commercial floor space forms part of the Council's draft local plan. Some of the potential benefits of this Garden Village scheme, as set out in the government's prospectus, I think to which you refer, include access to government housing funding streams and ensuring that the local authority has the right skilled staff in place or pay for key studies and assessments, and support in overcoming various barriers to delivery. We understand that the support offered would be tailored to the specific needs of the Council if we are successful. The expression of interest will be on a strictly without prejudice basis to the future determination of the current planning application for a new settlement at Dunsfold. However, an application needs to be made now to avoid missing the opportunity to bid for the community and infrastructure benefits that could be forthcoming if the settlement is approved. The expression of interest has the support of the landowner and will be submitted to be received by the government by the deadline of the 31st of July. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Mr. Taylor, have any questions been received from members?
None received, Mr. Mayor.
And have any motions been received?
None received.
In that case, we move to the minutes of the Executive, the Leader of the Council to present.
Sorry to butt in, Mr. Mayor. There's a lot of mumbling going on behind me, and I cannot hear the debate. So if I can ask the people to please to refrain from talking, it would help me tremendously. Thank you.
Thank you. Could members of the public please take note not to speak during the session? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have the minutes of the meeting of the 7th of June, the Executive held on Tuesday the 7th of June, and I believe I have a seconder.
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Moving forward to the first of the Part 1 items, recommendations to Council, on pages 13 and 14 and finishing page 15, which is the Cranley Conservation Area appraisal. and that is a detailed report before members, which I will take that members have read, and that starts on page 23.
Does anyone wish to make comment? In that case, we'll move to the recommendations, which are on the bottom of page 14 and the top of page 15. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I then move to item 10 on page 15, which is shopfront design supplementary planning document, SDP, for adoption, and that comes with one recommendation at the bottom of page 15.
Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to say how much I welcome this. Those of us who've been around for a bit knew the previous shop design guide was getting a little tired, shall we say. And I think as somebody who's greatly involved with the Farnham Conservation Area, I think to bring in the shop design guide at this stage, doing the Cranley area appraisal as well, I think it's an excellent piece of work, and I'm delighted that it's here for recommendation.
Anyone else? No? Move to the recommendation then, at the bottom of page 15, recommendation 11. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next item is item 11, which is the recruitment of a graduate trainee to the engineers team. Clearly, as a council, it's very important that we do make sure that we have adequate succession planning in place. And we have a number of staff who are approaching retirement, and they do have a wealth of knowledge, and we do need to make sure that we have continuity and this knowledge passed on. So I commend this recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was wondering if I could just quickly pay tribute to the engineering team who come under my portfolio. They are a very small team, and I think they will be the first people to admit that they are very much in the twilight years of their careers. And as such, as the leader has said, we do need to consider succession planning and making sure that we don't lose the knowledge that this small and critical team have within the council, and getting a graduate engineer into that, graduate trainee into that post will facilitate that, and I hope will be the start of a very successful career. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak on this item? Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to commend this to everybody. I have, and I'm sure many others have had, the support and knowledge of the engineers that are there. They've been extremely useful, extremely friendly, extremely knowledgeable, and if we can keep that going, it's great. In other parts of my life, I've seen it disappear with the retirement of somebody, and we haven't kept up with what's gone on in our towns and our villages, and this is a great move forward, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. We move on to the recommendation then, which is recommendation 12 in the middle of page 17. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. The next item on the agenda is item 13, which is a restructure of the Legal Services Department. I don't propose to talk about that in detail because it would involve moving to exempt. However, members will have read the detailed papers in their exempt annex, I'm sure. I am happy to take questions should they wish to go into exempt. However, I think it's just important to say that the actual reason for this restructure is to ensure that we have an extremely robust legal team. Again, it's part of Waverley's succession planning, which is of absolute paramount importance, and it is a cost-neutral planned restructuring. Thank you.
Councillor Frost, can I remind you that it's an exempt item? Please be careful.
I do know. I'm not intending to mention the exempt annex at all, but I'm delighted to hear that we are intending to have a more robust system in the Legal Services Department. And I do hope that with all these legal entities that we have, and the property section, etc., that speed is also of the essence when dealing with matters affecting our constituents.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I say that having read the exempt report, it's eminently sensible, and I would certainly think it would be a very good way forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody else? In that case, we move to recommendation 13, which is on pages 18 and 99. Are they agreed? Agreed. Moving on then.
Mr. Mayor, the second item, item 14, is the again in exempt. Should members wish to discuss it at length, clearly I'm happy to go into exempt, but they will find all details in Annex 5, and that's basically all I can at this point say on that matter. Thank you.
Does anybody wish to comment on this matter? In that case, we move straight on to the recommendation. Recommendation 14 on pages 18 and 105. That agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. We now move on to part 2.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Part 2, matters of report, starting with item 15, which was the Executive Forward Programme. We then move to revenue outturn and capital programme outturn, the Ewhurst and Ewhurst Green conservation area appraisals, the brownfield pilot, which is a new register, and Waverley are working within their planning department on that register. And item 20 was a review of overview and scrutiny arrangements.
I understand Councillor Fortescue wishes to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I would like to thank Councillor Pat Frost and members of the subcommittee. I personally found the experience very enlightening, useful and beneficial, and I believe going forward members can have more confidence in the process. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. We then move to appointment of the employers' negotiating team for the year 2016-17, and that's a team appointed from both members and members of the leadership and executive to work on, throughout the year on staff relations and work, obviously, with the senior personnel managers within Waverley. Item 22 was appointments to the Surrey County Council local task groups, which have now gone to Surrey County Council. And finally, item 23 on page 21 is the appointments to various outside bodies, where we do still have, I think, 1 or 2 reserves. So if there is anyone who's not found a place and would like to, then please obviously do let Democratic Services know. The final item on item 24 is outstanding debts for write-off. Again, this is a process that we undergo on a yearly basis, and it's actually anything in terms of a debt of more than £7,000 that we cannot recover. We do go through all avenues to recover debt, but we have to, unfortunately, at times recognise that we will not recover the debt and basically, unfortunately, cut our losses. And this is the case in some of these before you, again, in exempt papers tonight. We then moved to one set of executive directors' actions, which are item 25, and that was the 2p transfer of a member of staff who is working as a project manager, but actually lives within the Tandridge District Council area. And also, and my personal thanks on this matter to Mr. Wenham, the Executive Director, for authorising the establishment of the planning SIG. And I'd also like to take this opportunity, with your indulgence, Mr. Mayor, of actually thanking all those members of the special interest group who've helped and contributed so much over the last few weeks towards our local plan. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the minutes of the executive of the 7th of June. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. We move on to the next one, Leader.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I now present the minutes of the executive held on Tuesday, the 12th of July, and I believe I have a seconder.
Mr. Mayor, I'm pleased to second these as well.
Thank you. The first item, which is a Part 1 item, which is recommendations to Council, and that's, again, Budget Management, item 30, which you will see before you. And, again, that comes with one recommendation, which is the environment of money, £439,000, for urgent boiler works, as detailed above.
Do we have any speakers on this item? No, in which case we move directly to the recommendation number 15, which you'll find on page 160. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I now move to the next item, which is item 31, which is the Waverley Borough Local Plan Part 1, Strategic Policies and Sites. Mr. Mayor, before I start, there are two matters I would like to raise before I actually introduce the item in detail. The first is that we would like to call for a recorded vote, and I believe I have the number of members to support that.
Those supporting a vote, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Frost. We have more than the 5 required, so we will have a recorded vote.
Thank you. And again, for clarity's sake, and upon looking at the recommendations, I believe Mrs. McQuillan is going to display the amendment that I have, and I have a seconder.
Pleased to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Band. Give you all a moment to read that. Leader, do you want to speak to the amendment?
Not at this stage, Mr. Mayor. I think hopefully it does clarify a number of aspects that have been queried by people over the last few days, just to make sure that everyone knows what is included and what we will be submitting.
Would anyone like to speak to the amendment? Councillor Band.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I very much welcome this proposed amendment, because as we go into the consultation phase on our local plan, I think it's important that the public at large have as much information as possible from the work that's being done within the council by both officers and members to comment on. And so I particularly welcome some of these annexes which are supporting the local plan part 1 in this document are now to be released at the same time. And so everybody has already talked about the concerns about infrastructure. And so particularly with the infrastructure, the draft infrastructure delivery schedule, it gives people the opportunity to see what is currently proposed and to comment as to the adequacy or otherwise of that. Also, the comments of the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I'm sure will be of interest to many members of the public, because the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee has spent, well over 4 hours and 2 long sessions reviewing this document and having before them the authors of both the Surrey County Council traffic assessment and the Mock McDonald's transport plan. So I commend this amendment to members because I think it's a very useful addition to this particular recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support this amendment as well. I think it's important that members of the public and members of the committee here of the council are kept up to date. A number of these documents are living documents and will continue to be updated during the consultation or representation and after it. So it is important that these are brought to everyone's attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm delighted with this amendment because when I read the original recommendation, it didn't seem to tell everything. And what this does is it gives clarity to the documents that are being submitted with the local plan, with the draft plan. And that I'm pleased about. I would like to thank the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee who met to debate the plan and the transport assessment. I chaired that meeting. And the debate that came through was very sound, and people obviously, and they were pleading for the areas that they represented. So we have heard a lot of pleadings on behalf of Farnham and of Cranley, etc. But this does give clarity to what we are including in our documentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. Would anyone else like to speak to the amendment? No? In that case, can I ask, is the amendment agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the substantive issue. Are there any comments regarding the local plan? Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The local plan, this item is a request to authorise the publication of the Waverley Local Plan 2016 for representations. The document is reproduced on pages 209 to 378 in the papers before you. It is supported by 10 appendices and annexes. It has been a time-consuming and arduous task to reach this point, where the key policies and overall strategy for the development of Waverley over the period to 2032 can be presented to you. The officers of our Planning Policy Department are to be thanked for achieving this complex balance of demands between the government and our residents. The government demands that we make every possible effort to accommodate 519 new homes per annum in Waverley. Our residents would like us to limit this on sustainability grounds. A start was made by putting forward 4 options for housing distribution across the borough by consultation in 2014. The majority of responses suggested maximising the use of Dunsfold Park and limited any incursions into the Green Belt. The majority of work undertaken has been collecting the evidence base to support the competing demands of the last 2 statements, then analysing the outcome. The chapters covering the policy areas of this document can be found on page 211. At the end of each chapter is a brief description how the policy will be delivered and reference to the documents providing the evidence for the conclusions proposed. It was anticipated that there could be some limits set on the amount of housing to be delivered by the quality and lack of infrastructure available in Waverley. All issues raised relating to the local plan, individual planning applications are dealt with separately, have been investigated and referred to the appropriate statutory authority. To date, none have come back to say our plan is undeliverable. In respect of traffic, mitigation is expected to avoid any severe issues. In respect of utilities, any issues may be overcome by some rescheduling of development. In respect of Surrey County Council, Education and Social Services, Waverley is in constant coordination. In respect of the NHS, discussions continue with the 2 CCGs covering Waverley. It is possible that further evidence will emerge between now and the planned submission date in November, not least from the representations made by interested parties over the weeks following publication. Apart from the plan itself, a key task has been to cooperate with 7 authorities on our boundary. This has been ongoing for more than 4 years. Several now have local plans in place. There is one other authority which is in our housing market area where we are still seeking resolution of a major issue. Woking has an unsatisfied need for substantial additional housing, which is why you will see in the sustainability appraisal figure a figure of 12,100 being considered for Waverley. On a more positive note, our plan was reviewed on the 25th of May by an inspector who knows Waverley quite well. His comments and suggestions for changes were not numerous and have been included in the version before you. In addition, it has been presented to members' briefs, scrutinised by ONS and approved by the Executive. Once approved, this plan will give the Council positive control over development, a framework to support neighbourhood plans and a 5-year land supply. It will make speculative development harder and remove the threat of government information in planning at Waverley. This version is not final, but it is the beginning. Mr Mayor, there are 3 recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Wheatley.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Mayor. The publication of the draft local plan has exercised some of my residents in Binscombe. We had previously thought that the issue of pieces of greenbelt land to be proposed as possible development sites in our area had been safely disposed of. To a large extent, I'm delighted to confirm that this is still the case. The large hilly area opposite the Binscombe Medical Centre was withdrawn by the owners, and there is no suggestion of utilising greenbelt land along the side of New Pond Road. However, I understand that a further greenbelt review became necessary, throwing up the need for extra greenbelt allowance in both the Cranley and Farnham areas. As a result, it seems it was felt a strip of Binscombe's designated greenbelt, which was not deemed to be serving quite such an essential purpose, should be released for possible development. Colleagues and I had a meeting with officers where we stressed our concerns about the historic buildings in the vicinity, the conservation area, and the narrowness of the road leading from Binscombe Village to New Pond Road. However, even though we might prefer those fields to remain green, I fear we also have to be realistic. All too often, younger members of families have to move away from Waverley because there are no suitable affordable homes available to them. We also need key workers to live closer to their jobs, thus relieving the pressure on the roads. I have to say I am sad about having to agree to the loss of this piece of green belt, but my colleagues and I stress the need for a development not of high density, but of a sensitive design. There should be just one vehicular entrance with pedestrian routes included running through to the housing estate to the south, which would allow safe access to schools and other facilities in Binscombe and Farncombe. I have been told that the thick belt of trees between the 2 areas would also be retained. Mr Mayor, as we know, this is a living document, already having a swathe of amendments to be added to it. There is still time for further tweaking, so I would therefore request our residents to forward their comments to Waverley to enable their thoughts once more to be taken into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wheatley. Councillor Gray.
Thank you. This local plan, which is at a strategic level, has many good parts and protects and supports Waverley residents. A lot of hard work has got in to produce the many document chapters and the supporting evidence. There has been referred to many changes on the way, and some of us hope that there will be still some more changes to be made. When I became a councillor some 12 months ago, I knew Dunsfold Park was on everyone's mind in my ward, and that I would have to balance my ward with my Waverley's responsibilities. I'm sure that many councillors here have the same experience that I have. The portfolio holder referred in his address to the 4 options. With the majority vote by way of population, the Waverley public consultation was predictable. Not in my backyard votes for Dunsfold Park. This consultation provided the evidence on what became the preferred strategy, spatial strategy within the document. I've said this is a strategic plan, and it's going out to consultation so that all people in Waverley can input their views. I welcome this. Being strategic, it's at a higher level than the detail that would be considered at a planning application. Being in the plan does not mean that anyone has predetermined it. It will go forward to planning and be considered on its merits in a lot more detail than within the strategic plan. There are issues that people still have concerns with in terms of the balance of housing towards the east of the borough, the effect on Cranley, and above all, the effects of safety on the rural roads. We must expect that the public and pressure groups, probably from the east and west of the borough, will seek to make points and challenge our assumptions and conclusions. They will do this loudly. I wrote this before I heard coming in today, and with support from their experts. And we have to take on board their concerns. We may need to make some changes as we go through. I asked the leader and portfolio holder to think again about mitigation. Mitigation in the villages, mitigation in the many B and minor roads, and mitigation to provide safe links to rail stations and the A3. Have we done enough to protect the east of Waverley, the most unsustainable and least populated area? And have we put the houses in the right location, where people need to live and where they can easily and readily access their place of work?
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me start by acknowledging that Part 1 of the local plan represents the result of a large amount of work by officers with significant input from colleagues. I congratulate officers on much of the plan and thank them for their efforts. Like many colleagues, I'm not happy with the number and distribution of houses. However, I have to reluctantly accept that firstly, together we have chosen not to dispute the allocated number of houses to be built, and secondly, that options to locate the housing are limited if we are to honour our residents' wishes to protect the green belt. However, I've been hard pushed to find anybody in my ward who supports this draft plan, and public interest in this evening's meeting is testimony to that. When asked where they see shortcomings, the answer is invariably infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. Members have been asked to consider the plan without access to a current version of the infrastructure delivery plan, although a draft of that document appeared on the eve of last week's executive meeting. Whilst parts of the IDP are welcome and deliverable, others appear to be the product of excessive optimism. Let me quote from the 1973 Hambledon District Council consultation document on a possible relief road for Bramley. The very first line states, "It has been obvious for some time that Bramley Village has been suffering from a severe traffic problem. That exercise came to nothing because there is no obvious affordable solution to relieving the congestion that plagues the 281 in Bramley during term time peak hours." So if we fast forward 43 years, in addition to a proposal to signalise the Station Road A281 mini roundabout, which is probably realistic, though not universally welcomed, the draft IDP includes £600,000 to increase capacity and improve safety in Bramley. Whilst that level of funding is adequate to buy each family in the parish a new bicycle, I struggle to see how it will even scratch the surface of an engineering solution to increase capacity on the A281 or other minor roads in the parish. And if we can't get more traffic up the 281, then it's going to spill onto minor roads. Quoting from the recent Surrey Strategic Highways study, the largest increases in flow are apparent on model links in the southeast of the borough, specifically travelling to and from the largest proposed development sites of Dunsfold, as well as multiple sites in Cranley. The main routes utilised to access the strategic highway network of the A3 in 2031 Scenario 2 is between the southeast settlements of Dunsfold and Cranley via the unclassified roads to the Milford Junction. So it's good to see traffic management schemes for Waverley B and minor roads as the second item on the new IDP. But what do the authors of this plan expect to achieve for £1.5 million? The scale of the problem is far in excess of the funding suggested. In the last 2 weeks alone, I've heard of 2 separate instances of large vehicles causing hold-ups on Markwick Lane that took tens of minutes to clear. Turning narrow country lanes into viable thoroughfares or providing alternative routes for significant volumes of traffic will, in my view, take far more cash than is proposed. So in summary, the number and distribution of houses in the local plan is the consequence of our geography and the targets that have been imposed on us. While this may be something we struggle to avoid, I cannot support the publication of this plan without satisfactory evidence to demonstrate that appropriate infrastructure will be provided to support the level of housing proposed and that the additional traffic arising from these developments will not, after mitigation, generate unacceptable levels of congestion and risk in terms of safety. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Seaborn. Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important that the local plan is progressed. I have in mind that if we don't progress it and keep up to a certain timetable, which is also in the documents, that there is a serious risk that the government will take over control and decide what and where we put houses within this borough, which is not something that I am pleased about. That is not saying, of course, that this local plan is perfect. It isn't. And there are a lot of matters that still need to be resolved. But I think it is important that this plan, having had a great deal of work done on it by our officers and also reports that we've obtained on various aspects that are included in the plan, that it should now go for a public consultation so it can then be reviewed as a result of that. For example, so far as the village, one of the villages I represent, namely Wannish, it is a very important part of the draft infrastructure delivery schedule. When I look at page 420, which deals with the first of the transport issues outside Waverley, deals in effect with the traffic through Shelford. And King's Road, which is referred to there, is the road that leads to Wannish, Shamley Green and on to Cranley. Here we clearly need more information, which no doubt will be obtained during the course of the consultation or soon thereafter. We don't know the cost at which is going to be sources of funding the Dunsfold Aerodrome developers. And this could be a very large sum of money, I suspect. It's not being put down to come from the Department of Transport. And I understand there are other practical issues for this to happen, namely that part of the land required to make these improvements is common land and not in the control of the Surrey County Council highways. So we do have some practical problems, and it's no good shifting everything up as far as Shelford, having had mitigation measures in Bramley, only to find that we have a situation where Shelford, which is outside our borough, is totally gridlocked and tails back towards Cranley, towards Bramley, and towards Peasmarsh. So there's a lot of problems there, but I still, having said that and recognising that, it is important that we progress the local plan, move it a stage further, so that these issues can be aired by the public and we can get more information, fill up the TBCs on cost, so we all know exactly what we're talking about. So, Mr. Mayor, subject to anything else I hear, I will be supporting the recommendations that are on the order paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich. Councillor Foraszewski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we have to be mindful that this agenda item is not about adopting the local plan. It's about you having the opportunity to have a comment and have a say through the consultation process. I am supporting the draft Part 1 local plan. And why? Because without it, we have little or no protection against inappropriate development. This draft local plan is by no means perfect. It's got an awful long way to go, and unfortunately, I do believe it is flawed. We're only going to iron those flaws out if we get the opportunity to look at it through the consultation process. Even if an inspector in 2017 decides he wants to take over if we don't have our plan in situ, that doesn't mean to say that we will not remain vulnerable to inappropriate development. I applaud the new leader, Julia Potts, for having the good sense for allowing a SIG which has given direction and credibility to the process. There are some good points from the local plan, from the local draft plan, which includes at last recognising one of the largest brownfield sites in the borough. Can I just briefly for a while describe how it also describes Cranley, with its 11,000 population, a good range of services for its size. Cranley enjoys an extremely good environmental quality, with a large common extending to the shopping area that is notably as being attractive to the pedestrian friendly. It has a wide range of shops, many independent, and contribute to its village character as it currently stands. However, I must and I do condemn what is proposed in the draft for Cranley. A percentage of nearly 48% increase with no infrastructure, least sustainable of the 4 main settlements in Waverley with no objectively assessed need identified. For Cranley, it would seem this has been a plan in the making for decades and a vision of a few. It does not represent or reflect fact. Currently, permissions granted in excess of over 765 is likely to change the very good quality as I've just described. And all because we have no policy to protect us, and not enough has been done to Cranley to safeguard its future. Cranley has just been an easy target and subject to the worst of both. Furthermore, many of the strategic sites in the draft are still subject to the planning process. This is not a given. If we don't approve for publication, we cannot consult. If we cannot consult, you can't have your say. I trust residents across Waverley to voice their opinion and have their say. This document is subject to change. It's not set in stone and we don't have to accept it the way it is. Going forward, the process in itself will render the plan to change. The only way you can shape is to be part of the submission and upon examination, let an inspector who may justify and see that there is an imbalance and ask that we relook at some of our areas. Recommending approval for publication tonight is not about soundness or deliverability. It's about a choice. I would rather be in there fighting in a democratic elected way than having the right removed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This has caused, local plan has caused a lot of angst amongst many communities within Waverley. And it is unfortunate that the mere way that the borough is arranged means that most of the housing will need to go into the Farnham, Badshottley area and into Cranley. That is really unfortunate. And I feel for the people who don't want any more houses. But the fact is, we need houses. We need homes for our young people, and we need to make sure that we are in charge of what is put in. If we have to give this plan up because we're too busy arguing about it, what will happen is, in my view, and I know not all my colleagues agree with me, that the government will take over. And we will then have no say in what happens. Now, because the site is in the local plan, it does not mean it's going to be built on it. It means it's been identified as a possible area the houses could be built if there was an appropriate planning application. And I do understand what people are saying about infrastructure, because for me there was one major omission in the plan, and that was the Recklesham Relief Road. Because when the Hindhead Tunnel closes, all the traffic coming up from the coast is diverted through the conservation village of Recklesham and subsequently Farnham. That, for me, was a grave omission. I hope we're going to put that right, Mr. Adams. But it is causing people a lot of angst. This is not going to happen overnight. You know, this is a 20-year plan. So the 2,600 houses on Dunsfold are not going to be there tomorrow, but they will be there over a period of time. So please, I will be supporting this plan, and we do need infrastructure. But at the moment, we've got the planning applications, we don't quite know what infrastructure we want, because a lot of infrastructure will be built into the planning application as it comes in. And that's important. And we, as councillors on the planning authority, have some influence on that. And therefore we must take advantage of that influence that we have. But I do understand the people from Cranley. It's only 11,000 people in the village. Well, I always call it a small town. But there are 11,000 people, and it matters to them that they feel that the whole of their village is going to be changed. It's our job to make sure it's not. That's why we're elected, and that's what we must do. We must look at what is coming before us very critically and make sure that we get what is right for the people we all represent. I'm as concerned about Cranley as I am about Farnham. So it is important we all know that we are here to do a job for the people we represent. I will be supporting the draft plan, because if we don't get this through, I don't want to sit here and be told by an inspector what they're going to do to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. Is there anyone else who should speak? Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to repeat the expressions of thanks to the officers and members who've worked on this and the comments made about why this is an essential next step forward. If I may, I'd like to cast my eyes a little further into the future and to recognise that we've responded to a very difficult challenge, and we've done so by recognising that the only way we can deliver 519 new homes per annum until 2032 is to include in the list of sites possibly the most controversial one in the borough, namely Dunsfold Aerodrome. And it's no surprise that there was a certain element of demonstration outside the offices this evening. It must be unusual for a borough seeking to put forward as its local plan one that depends so heavily, indeed to the tune of 25% of the total, a site with such a problematic planning history. It's only 7 years ago that the Secretary of State upheld the inspector's refusal of an appeal against this council's refusal of an application for 2,601 new homes, fully one more than the amount currently put into the local plan. And since that time, we've had, of course, a great change. The OAN, the objectively assessed need, has more than doubled. The planning policy environment has changed with the introduction of the NPPF, or National Planning Policy Framework. And of course now we're considering, which we were not at the time, substantial development in Cranley and the surrounding villages. So it does not need much imagination to realise that this is a very difficult one to solve. But what I'd like to say is that the local plan process is designed to cope with difficult challenges. And after this document has gone out for consultation and has been modified, perhaps not to a great extent, but perhaps to some extent, it then goes to the Planning Inspectorate so it can be examined in great detail at a forum called the examination in public. And that is the key democratic opportunity for those with serious objections or concerns about part of a local plan to make their voices heard. They're able to spend almost as much time as they like, supported by any experts they have, and certainly my understanding is that those who are concerned about Dunsfold Park are well organised and professional and have taken professional advice. I believe it to be in everyone's interests that a problematic site of such importance to the local plan should get a deep and detailed examination in front of the inspector with experts on both sides making their cases. No matter what the outcome, I think that is the best way in which all of us can feel as comfortable as possible. I won't be so naive as to suggest happy entirely with the outcome. And I certainly take the view that although we're absolutely right to put forward this local plan in the form that it is, we do so in a spirit of some humility and uncertainty. And we look forward to seeing what the outcome of the examination in public will be. Because I certainly, having worked quite closely on the transport side, recognise how difficult it is to make reliable forecasts about the future. The expression using a foggy telescope comes to mind. When looking at Surrey County Council's work, one recognises how strategic and therefore high level it is, and it doesn't pretend to look at the local issues to the same extent. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm very happy to support this while encouraging those who have concerns to use the opportunities available to them in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Molyneux. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On behalf of the nascent opposition on Waverley Borough Council, I would like to make a collective thank you and congratulations to the mammoth task that's been done by officers and councillors and others in producing this huge plan and all the supporting documents to go with it. I haven't even scraped the surface yet in reading it, but I have been able to determine that there are weak points, and many councillors here this evening have mentioned them. There are fallibilities in this. When it comes to housing, it looks unreasonable that Cranley and Dunsfold in the east and that Farnham in the northwest have such a disproportionate number of houses to handle. And when it comes to transport, we appreciate difficulties with the 281 passing through the east of Waverley, but we also know from bitter personal experience that the 31, 325 and 287 in the northwest of Waverley have acute problems and are very vulnerable to the planning decisions made by the boroughs, the wards of Hampshire to the east, Rushmore to the north, and Guildford to the east, and Hampshire to the west. If I get the east and west sorted out, the traffic might be modified. We are suffering hugely with transport, and I see that as a very difficult area within this local plan. But overall, for everybody throughout the whole of Waverley, all those utilitarian practical issues which we bundle together as infrastructure are of overwhelming importance. And I make the plea that the infrastructure has to precede the housing development, or we will have a huge crisis on our hands. But I think this is a vital step forward. I think a vote of thanks is necessary to those who have prepared it. I wish it well. And even now, at this late date, after 3 attempts, I do believe this local plan will get acceptance. One last point. We need to read it very carefully and make critical comment. This, councillors particularly, and members of the public too, need to obtain a copy, get a hard copy, and spend hours reading it, putting together your critical comments. It is to be developed. I would ask, do we have a date by which comment on this issue, part 1, would be accepted, and beyond which they would not be accepted? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. I'm sure your question will be answered in a few minutes. Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, there's been so much said this evening and so many good words that it's difficult for me to come up with very much more, except to say, of course, we had a wonderful welcome this evening as we arrived in. I'm sure we all appreciated it. There's obviously a great deal of angst and fervour amongst all of the residents of the eastern end of the borough. And, of course, they hadn't had the opportunity of reading the draft infrastructure delivery schedule. However good or bad it might be, however inadequate it might be, they had no idea of what there was going to be there. It was only published a few days ago, and I'm sure that most of them will not have had a chance to read it. But the problems that we have in the east and, of course, in Farnham, and the point that Councillor Frost made with regard to the tunnel, the Hindhead Tunnel, I can remember arguing the point, and it wasn't in our gift to actually say anything, but I can remember arguing strongly that we shouldn't close the Devil's Punk Pole Road. We should leave that as a relief road. Everybody poo-pooed that and didn't think it was a good idea. Wouldn't it be lovely to have that back so that we could actually bypass the tunnel easily? But nevertheless, we are where we are. If we keep on stopping, we'll get another smart. So we'll end up with more, a housing requirement, and we'll end up with more houses. It keeps on going up as each time we stop. And if the inspector takes over, would there be another check? And they come up with more than 519 houses. I'm afraid that so many of the sites that we have on our list it's availability, not suitability, definitely not suitability, but nevertheless we have to judge each one as it comes forward as a planning application and live with what we've got. And I think we need to obviously work hard with the residents, who will have lots to say, I'm sure, and bring us hopefully to a better plan than we have already put forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We move on to Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also will be supporting the recommendations this evening for very much the reasons set out by Councillor Goodrich and others. However, like my colleagues from the eastern part of the borough, my concern is mainly about traffic, and I'll refer to traffic issues in the Farnham area. I've lived for Farnham for about 30 years now, and I've seen a constant deterioration in the traffic situation, to the extent I believe it's coming pretty serious. And there's no doubt that the extra 2,330 houses in Farnham, which will add about 3,500 cars, will potentially make that worse. But even more so, I'd like to refer to the fact that Farnham is actually bordered by 4 of the other local authorities referred to earlier. We're bordered by East Hants, Hart, Rushmore and Guildford. And I added up the actual housing plans of these boroughs, and it amounts to 37,500 houses. Now, not all of these houses will be close to Farnham, but the Town Council did an evaluation 2 or 3 years ago, and about 20,000 of these houses will be close to Farnham. So that means we'll have something like 30,000 cars coming potentially into Farnham, into the 4 A roads that come into Farnham from these other boroughs. And that will very much add to the problem. And I'm not convinced that that has actually been taken into account in the local plan, and that's something I would like to pursue in the next stages. And I'm not convinced either that the mitigation measures mentioned, either for Cranley or for Farnham, will solve the problem. I don't fully understand the mitigation measure being proposed for Cranley and Dunsfold area, but certainly in Farnham we're talking about fairly minor matters, like new traffic lights at Shepherd and Flock and changing the lanes at Hickley's Corner. I just don't see that as being an answer to the problem. So I think there's a lot of things still need to be looked into in terms of traffic problems, not just in Farnham, but in the borough generally, and I hope that's considered in the next stage of the plan. But certainly congratulations to Councillor Adams and the officers for the tremendous work they've done. It's been an enormous task, and I fully support the congratulations given by others. But there's a great deal of work still to be done, and I hope the public, and I'm sure the public, will actually respond to the consultation stage coming up. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Notter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was not going to speak earlier, but Councillor Pat Frost, when she spoke, it really touched my heart. When we entered today, the reception was given to us was totally very, what you call, informative, what we have done, without even knowing what we have done. And let me remind the people that we are elected from them and we live among them. As they have the pain, we have the pain as well regarding these points, that there's a building being done, and Farnham, Pat knows as well, there are buildings being done. But as Pat said to us regarding that, if it's enforced to us, it's going to be a problem, and then we won't have a say. If they, instead of giving us that kind of reception, come to us and help us to help them as well and ourselves. Because I've got my kids over here, rest of them have their kids. We are here to live in this country and on this land, and we have selected that. So we are among them who want to live among them and are elected by them. So I would say, come and help us. Don't go against us. We could help them and they could help us. And we are the same people what they are. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Knowles.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. As everyone else has already said, there is a need to move forward, but we need to move forward with honesty and not wild assumptions and breaking undertakings. And there are two things that concern me in the documents before they go out to everybody, which have been bothering me, as colleagues will know, over the last couple of years. Briefly on the green belt, of course, some 12 months ago we gave an undertaking, and it was in the manifesto at Godalming, that we wouldn't change it. And now there are proposals here to do so, and Councillor Wheatley spoke about the problems that may cause. But leaving that aside, my main worry is the traffic and the Surrey County Council report, which I think is very poor indeed. As Councillor Mulliner has said, it does little for Waverley. Looking to it, it makes frequent mentions of Paynes Hill and the M25, and I suspect a lot of our residents will ask where Paynes Hill is and what relevance it has to traffic crawling through Farnham or up the A281, or certainly on the A286 in Hazelmere. It's full of woolly promises and assumptions, which if you believe, you'll believe anything. Look at the last improvement anywhere near the A3, which is outside the Royal Surrey County Hospital, where the free-flowing roundabout was removed and replaced by traffic lights, which causes queuing back up the A3 every morning and takes the A3 down to a single road. That was the mitigation and improvement there. It also talks about cycling and wanting people to cycle and walk to the station at 7:23, encouraging that. I have some sympathy, because if your office is based in London, as Surrey County Council are, and it's very flat, you might not realise that perhaps in Hazelmere the station is at 600 feet, and many of the people who come to the train come from 900 feet above sea level. In fact, outside here it's only 18, because this has many hills in this borough. And if they think people are going to cycle up those hills in pouring rain in the winter, or walk to mitigate the number of cars, that is plainly ridiculous. Hazelmere Hospital, thank you. Hazelmere Hospital had to have 2 cycle racks, took away 2 parking spaces when we gave permission for a car park. I regularly walk past that. The maximum number of cycles I have ever seen in there is 1, and it's usually empty. 2 parking spaces were lost for that. So the traffic is quite terrible. We all know that, and to ignore it and pretend that it isn't makes us look very, very stupid. Councillor Frost and Byram referred to the Hindhead Tunnel, and I'm glad they did, because there were those local residents wanting the old A3 to stay open. They were assured by the experts that there would be a closure once every 7 years. There's been over 100 in the first 4. So we must take, with a great pinch of salt, much of this report. Improvements to public transport. It said, well, Surrey County Council have just announced their bus review in Hazelmere. The 59 service is being taken out altogether. Although it wasn't part of the review, it's happening. That's 20% of the buses gone. So when it says in here about improving public transport, in fact, we're going headlong in the opposite direction. Whilst we need to do this, and much of this is good work, I just get the feeling that the serious transport problems are being swept under the carpet. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Last call. No? Fine. Leader, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think everyone here is agreed that Waverley is a very unique borough, and I speak as a resident of Waverley as well as a councillor, as we all are here. And this plan, this draft local plan, has presented us with many, many challenges. We've had to make some very tough decisions, and I think everyone here today recognises that, whatever part of the borough you live in. As I said, it's a very unique borough. The geography is such. We have 4 very different settlements and a number of villages. We have huge swathes of green belt, large areas of AGLV and AONB. Large areas of Waverley are protected. That in itself has proved very challenging for us. But let us be clear, we have had to produce a draft local plan that balances the needs of residents and businesses and visitors. We've tried to ensure that wherever possible we protect the borough's countryside, heritage and landscapes. And both officers and lead members have worked tirelessly with numerous infrastructure providers to deliver this draft plan. And I personally would like to thank all the officers, members, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, who worked very hard, held 2 sittings, and have provided us with invaluable feedback, and the Planning SIG as well for all their feedback and help. So thank you on a personal level to everyone who's already fed into this plan. It will not please everyone, and we all recognise that, I think, in many of the statements that have been made this evening. But let us be very clear. We need an evidence-based plan that meets the requirements of current government policy and the Planning Inspectorate. And from all the feedback that we have had from the Inspectorate and from the various specialist consultants that we've employed, this will do that. It's crucial to note that the local plan is just a part of the planning process, as referred to earlier, and any developments identified in this draft plan will still have to go through the usual planning application process and all the usual tests that any application would go through. Now, members, stakeholders, interested parties and all residents will have their opportunity to make representations on the plan. The plan will, in this draft format, will be published in early August. It will be published on our website, but you will also receive notification as members as well, and it will be in the press so that you're well aware, and you have a 6-week response time. That gives you time to feedback and give us your thoughts and input. As Councillor Foresteski said earlier, it gives you more opportunity to feedback and help us shape this plan for the future. Now, a number of questions have been raised, and there have been some comments about infrastructure. And I think we all recognise, I myself am a member from Farnham, but we all recognise that across the borough, infrastructure is of concern. And infrastructure will happen. There will be phasing on development where appropriate. We've recognised there are concerns about infrastructure and especially transport. And as well as obviously working with Surrey and Highways England, who have not objected to our plan. We have also employed at our own cost Mott MacDonald, who've given very comprehensive reports on traffic and their suggestions of mitigation. Godalming's Greenbelt has also been mentioned, and let us be clear, to ensure we have a sound plan, we've made sure that every aspect of that plan has been reviewed in the last few months, and that does include Greenbelt, and there have been some changes. However, the Godalming changes are not of the scale that was proposed 2 years ago, and local members have been fully updated on that, as Councillor Wheatley says. But if members of the public wish to comment on that area, of course we would welcome their comments and feedback. So members, people will have their opportunity to make representations on the plan, you will have your opportunity, and the stakeholders will have their opportunity. And the inspectorate ultimately will then inspect the plan and make his decision. But Waverley has to take back control. We have to shape the future, and we have to ensure that we deliver appropriate development throughout the borough. And I commend these recommendations to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. So we move to the recommendations. They are numbers 16 as amended and behind me, 17 and 18 on page 166. Are they agreed? Oh, I do apologise. I forgot we were doing a recorded vote. So we will now do a recorded vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members, when I call out your name, please say whether you wish to vote for, vote against, or abstain. Thank you. Councillors Brian Adams. For. Mike Band.
For.
Andrew Bolton.
For.
Maurice Byam. For. Carol Coburn. For. David Else. For. Jenny Else. For. Mary Forozewski. For. John Fraser. For. Pat Frost. For. Michael Goodridge.
For.
Tony Gordon-Smith.
For.
John Gray.
For.
Val Henry. Christian Hesser.
For.
Stephen Hill.
For.
Mike Hodge.
For.
David Hunter.
For.
Simon Inchbold.
For.
Peter Isherwood.
For.
Anna James.
For.
Carol King.
For.
Robert Knowles.
Abstain.
Martin Lear.
For.
Dennis Lee.
For.
Andy MacLeod.
For.
Tom Martin.
For.
Stephen Mulliner.
For.
Nabil Nazir.
For.
Libby Piper. Julia Potts. Stephen Reynolds. David Round.
For.
Richard Seaborn. Jeanette Stennett.
For.
Stuart Stennett.
For.
Mr. Mayor.
For.
Bob Upton.
For.
Liz Wheatley.
For.
Nick Williams. Thank you. So, yeah. Okay, members, there are 3 abstentions and 37 votes for.
That is then agreed. Leader.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I move to item 32, which is the Thames Basin Heath Spa Avoidance Strategy, page 167. That has one recommendation.
Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The consultation on a revised avoidance strategy ran to the 25th of April, partially due to an average occupancy rate measures of football in the park and improvements to the facilities for SANG qualification, it's been calculated that the unallocated capacity would increase to 1,462 dwellings. The strategy is in accordance with Natural England's approved approach for providing alternative space for the recreation of homeowners living within a 5 kilometre zone of the spa. This applies to most of Farnham. There were 23 responses to the consultation, which are listed together with other officer comments on pages 441 to 449. A number of matters were raised that have required modification to the avoidance strategy, which are itemised in section 32.6 on page 168. These changes have all been made to the document. There's one recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I note Natural England's approved approach, but I wish to inquire as to what happened to Natural England's report on the effectiveness of SANG, which was requested and a copy delivered to this council, I believe in October, November last year. I clearly remember Councillor Isherwood waving a copy at me and saying, "This is unacceptable," though he was non-specific as to why it was unacceptable. We were told, we were reassured that in fact Natural England will be requested to reframe the report and resubmit it. I suspect that the report made it quite clear that SANG was not working, and it had to be resubmitted to ensure that it said that it was working. We have yet, I believe, to receive that report. I would ask, where is it, and when will it be made available for us to read?
Any further speakers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No, in which case, Leader, do you want to sum up?
Thank you. In answer to Councillor Fraser's question, we have not had the publication back. We are still awaiting that, and for the time being, we are told it's business as usual. But obviously, again, following your question, officers will ensure they chase Natural England. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is one recommendation under that item.
Okay, the recommendation is number 19 on page 168. We're not doing a count for this one, so is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Leader.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Item 33 on page 169 relates to the Memorial Hall in Farnham. And just in summary for members to be aware that as part of the tender process, some additional elements of work were identified and priced. The objective was to ensure that we identified future income generating streams for the hall, and one such element was the additional work to the lower ground floor as a space for offices. And following work with the architect and the design team, this space has actually now been identified as a new home for Waverley Training Services. Waverley Training Services are currently based in Farnham, but in a somewhat older building in need of a large amount of work and investment. So the council's been looking for some time to identify more suitable premises, and it was felt that this would be an ideal home for Waverley Training Services. I believe Councillor Bolton is also speaking to this item. Thank you.
Is that right, Councillor Bolton?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report deals with the construction of a community wellbeing centre at the site of Farnham's Memorial Hall as a new location for the existing Brightwell's Gostry Centre. We were also able to relocate the Council's Waverley Training Services operation to the lower ground floor. We must note it's the lower ground floor. I would like to identify some key points. The project has been thoroughly tested in the market and a competitive quote accepted. The tender prices reflect the work we plan to do and the costs in today's market. Waverley Training Services, at present in the pump house, is currently poorly located and requires investment to bring it to a reasonable standard. The training services will occupy the unused lower ground floor. The move of training to the new location with easier access will give us an opportunity to grow the service, something which is dear to my heart as the portfolio holder for economic development. The pump house where Waverley Training Services is now will be vacant, and this will allow us to generate a capital sum to support work at the Memorial Hall. I commend the report to all members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mayor. This is a good news story. It really is, and I just hope that we can get on with this. For newer members who don't know, Waverley Training Services provides training for NEETs. And they are the young people who have left school, don't like education, and need to find something to do. And we have for many, many years been operating a service where we take these young people and we get them into gardening, garage, mechanics, all sorts of things. And so to take them out of the depths of Kimber's Lane and down there, where you really have to know where you're looking and where you're going to find it, and moving it to the Memorial Hall, I think is a great story, and I'm just delighted that we've been able to do it. Now, if any of the newer members don't know about Waverley Training Services, I suggest they find out, because it is something that I think we've now extended it into Godalming. But it is a great good news story, and I'm looking forward to the Memorial Hall becoming a state-of-the-art centre for older people in the community. That is a growing demographic, and therefore for it to be there and for us to have something which is really purpose-built, great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Councillor Frost has already said, this is indeed a good news story. Actually, I would go further and say this is a great news story. This is a win for Waverley Training Services, who get a new home that's fit for purpose. This is a win for the Gostry Centre, who get new neighbours, and their cafe will be better used and therefore more viable and more sustainable. This is also a win for Waverley, where we get better and really good use of our assets. So I commend this recommendation to Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start with a question, if I may. The Memorial Hall is essentially meant to be a community feature in Farnham. It was left to Farnham for the benefit and use and enjoyment of the inhabitants of the urban district of Farnham. Now, I'd like to ask, first of all, why has there been no consultation on this in Farnham? No local members knew anything about it. The town council didn't know anything about it, the mayor, the leader, or the town clerk. And if this is a community feature in Farnham, why has there not been extensive consultation about this? Let me start by saying I did go down to meet Kelvin Mills at the Waverley training services. And training services is obviously a great thing, actually, very much to be supported and very much to be commended, in the same way as the Gostry Centre is actually. Last time I spoke on the subject of the Memorial Hall, I was accused by other members of being ageist and discriminating against old people, even though I think I'm rather older than the people who are accusing me of being ageist. But my concern is not about any of that. It's about, is this the proper use of the Memorial Hall? Is it in line with the covenants? I don't think it is. Let me just mention a couple of them, the items in the deed of gift. It says neither the hall or the sports ground shall be let by the council to any one person, corporation, club, organisation or association exclusively for any longer period than 1 day. That doesn't seem to fit in with making an office building for Waverley Borough Council. Another one that I'll just mention because I happened to notice it, there's a sign outside the hall that says what the hall can be rented for, and includes sales, auctions, weddings and things. The last item in the covenant says that no sale or auction to be allowed to take place in any part of the said premises on any building erected thereon. So I'm just not at all convinced that Waverley is in any way respecting the wishes of the people who gifted this hall to Farnham. And that's my big concern. I totally commend Waverley Training Service. I totally commend the Gostry Centre. And for that matter, Farnham Football Club. They're all things I totally support. I'm just not sure that Waverley is respecting this hall and using it for the purposes it was originally intended for. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And for that reason, I'll be voting against this recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, how many more rabbits can we pull out of the hat? I'm just amazed and surprised, very pleasantly surprised to find this use. What we haven't heard, or at least what I haven't heard, is what the use of the lower ground floor is or was, and what we're taking over. Was it used for general services in there, or was it just a void space used for storage or whatever? And have we got a lower ground floor so we can expand further in? And finally, will the Gostry Centre, when it moves there, be able to provide a facility for catering service training for our trainees, so that we've got another win-win situation in the building? So I'm very happy with this thing. Having met with the Waverley Training Service on a number of occasions, I'm very happy to see them hopefully going to a new home.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Else.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In answer, if I may, to your question, Councillor Byam, yes, the Gostry Centre will be able to provide sustenance, in fact, to the whole community, which, if necessary, which is a really good news story for them, because it does make their facility very much more sustainable, as we've already heard. So I really welcome this as a really good initiative. It's going to help to make the centre a much more wider facility for the community, and that can only be to the good as far as I'm concerned. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Anything further? Leader, do you like to sum up?
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Just to be absolutely clear on the area being developed, that was a combination of the former football club changing rooms, which were quite large and in severe need of work, and a number of storage areas, and that actually combined gives an awful lot of room in the lower ground floor. I don't think, to your point, Councillor Byam, we're going to manage any further lower ground floors. In answer to the points raised by Councillor MacLeod, the covenant also states very clearly that the hall can be used for educational use, and Waverley Training Services, as members have heard, provide a number of courses, apprenticeship courses, so there is the educational usage that is allowed, and it's under that that we are actually going ahead with these works. We, as I say, are using existing space and developing that further, and it's really important that we have a multi-use, multi-age centre that is fit for all and fit for the future, and shows us investing in Farnham, in its future, and in our young. Thank you.
Move on then to the recommendations, which are numbers 20 through to 23 on page 171. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We noted that you were against. Thank you. Leader, item 34.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The item number 34, which is on page 171, is the report of the Constitution SIG. And the paper before you really summarises the area of work that the Constitution SIG looked at during its meetings and proposed recommendations to Council for taking these changes forward. They include amending the scheme of delegation so that any councillor within the remit of an area planning committee can call in a planning application to the area or joint planning committee and not just the ward councillor. The Special Interest Group also reviewed the part of the Constitution that sets out the procedure for members of the public asking questions at meetings of the Council, and the proposal before you is that Council replace the informal question time with a far more comprehensive arrangement for the submission of formal questions. This would ensure that we offer members of the public slightly longer to actually submit their questions, but also ensure that they're guaranteed a comprehensive answer. And the amendments to the Constitution that are necessary are within the report. Mr. Mayor, there are 3 recommendations, and once again my thanks to all members of the Special Interest Group.
Would anyone wish to speak on this item? Councillor Fraser.
Sorry to keep coming back, Mr. Mayor. I do urge you not to change the informal question format. This will be misunderstood by the electorate, who have become accustomed to the ability to turn up at their borough hall and ask an informal question. It will be seen as circumscribing their freedom to sit and write a formal question some days prior may sound very good. It may ensure they have a comprehensive answer. It may ensure that, in fact, it's dealt with more systematically. But politically, I see it as being very unwise. I would urge you not to vote for recommendation 26.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I'm very happy with all of these 3 recommendations. I would just actually like to beef up recommendation 26. Where we ask for formal questions, I'd like them to be questions and not lengthy and often incomprehensible statements.
That was short and sweet. I wasn't ready for you. Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just speaking about the formal and informal questions, as a member of the SIG, I think it's a win situation. Formal questions now, people have only got 4 clear working days before they can compose their question instead of 7, which ensures that there'll be much more use, hopefully, of formal questions where they'll get a comprehensive answer. I have sort of witnessed over the years that the informal questions tend to be answered on the lines of, I'll get back to you in due course. That sort of answer, which really is not very helpful when people want to do it. Councillor Fraser mentions that the public will not understand the changes. Well, as I understand it, on the basis that this goes through, there will be publicity so that members of the public can be fully aware of the changes so that they can take use of it. And so I hope that it's implied that everyone will know about it. And on Councillor Reynolds' point, as I understand it, by looking at the, we've covered that as well in the end of 10.5, where it says, is not substantive in the form of a question, or the length of the preamble is disproportionate to the question. In other words, we're giving officers the chance of actually cutting out sort of paragraphs and paragraphs of preamble before a simple question is given at the, at the end. So I'm very much, as you'd expect, I suppose, as a member of the SIG, very much in favour of these amendments.
Thank you. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm somewhat surprised at Councillor Fraser that he should think that people who take the opportunity to come here and ask a question would not want a proper reply. I have sat in this chamber and I've heard replies to questions from members of the public on the informal question time, which could be regarded as a bit dismissive. I'm sorry to be as blunt as that. And it seems to me, anyway, that if somebody has a question, and it's an important question, that's why they come, that to write that question down and to get a proper response shows that we value them coming. You know, it's up to all of us to sell this as a very positive idea. I know a colleague of yours who is not here tonight, who is on the SIG, does not like this particular one because he thinks people will misunderstand it. No, they won't. Not if we explain why we're doing it. This is meant to be positive. And I think that a lot of people that come before us, some may not, but a lot of people who come before us will think this is a positive move to give them answers they require. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'd like to congratulate the SIG on these proposals which they've come forward with. I do think they will make for better comprehension. I think anybody who's got a question to ask surely wants an answer. I think informal questions too often have been used as an excuse to make a statement wrapped up in a question. And on top of that, I particularly commend the additional powers offered to the Executive Director and be able to limit some of these tortuous questions, where a lot of them seem to end up as in the form of when did you stop beating your wife sort of style. And I really do think this is a positive way forward, which makes sure that genuine questions are asked and they should get genuine answers. Thank you.
Councillor Byam?
I'd like to go back to item number 25, recommendation at 25, the Joint Planning Committee. I'm not clear that I understand exactly how this will work. I hope that we will, at some stage, I'm not going to vote against it or none of that, but at some stage we have some form of explanation as to how it would work. As far as I understand, with JPC applications, they are recommended for approval by the officers and come forward to the JPC, or they're refused by the officers. Are we asking the reverse to happen? If we're going to refuse them, we want them to be brought forward by members, and how will we know that? Within the timescale that is there. I think it's going to be extremely difficult to work in any way, and perhaps it will never be used. But it's not clear in any way, from my point of view, what is explained within the text of the report and recommendation, how it will work, and I would like that clarification at some stage in the future.
Any further contributions? No? Leader?
Thank you. I think members have really said all there is in terms of the recommendations, especially around the subject of questions. And I think we would all agree that the public, when they do come into the council chamber, are deserving of a detailed answer, and many of them actually see it as us being uncooperative if we do not have all the knowledge and the information to hand. So I'm hoping that everyone will see this for what it is. It's us trying to recognise and find the right balance and ensure that, like many other councils do, we provide the public with the answers in a timely fashion, which is what they deserve. There is no hidden agenda. In terms of the questions raised by Councillor Byam will ensure that there is very clear guidance with these changes that are before people coming to all members, so there can be no confusion at all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. So we move to recommendations 24, 25 and 26, which are on page 173. Are we agreed? Agreed. And Councillor Fraser is against. Thank you. Item 35.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 35 is officer support for overview and scrutiny. An options analysis was carried out, and this sort of followed the findings that came from the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee's review of scrutiny at Waverley, and I would like to again echo my thanks to the panel and all involved in that. There were a number of recommendations that came out of that panel, including training and a number of other changes. And there are 3 options which are set out in this report which relate to the members' recommendation and a desire for a dedicated scrutiny officer. The recommendation is for option 3, a new scrutiny officer post within the Council's corporate policy team. And whilst I'm very mindful of the resource implications of this, it is my judgment that this is the best way forward to ensure that we support the degree of change that all members want to see. There are 2 recommendations, Mr. Mayor, and I commend these to Council.
Does anyone wish to speak on this? No, in which case we move directly to the recommendations 27 and 28 on page 178. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 36.
Mr. Mayor, item 36 is the recruitment of an IT support analyst. Sorry, my apologies there. And I believe Councillor Martin wishes to speak to this item.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Via a quirk of our scheme of delegation, this item is to essentially recruit 0.2 of an IT support analyst. The other 0.8 having been made up by a retiring officer who had 2 separate part-time IT roles made up of 2 two-day roles, which are being covered from within the existing team. In order to get a full-time IT officer to work that 5th day to replace them, we need the other 0.2. Bear with me. All this is within the existing budget for the team, so there is no increased requirement on our budget, and I commend the one single recommendation to Council. Thank you.
Well, I hope you understood that, Councillor Martin. Anyone else wish to make a comment? No, in that case, the Leader, I don't think you want to sum up. No. So move to the recommendation number 29 on page 178. Is that agreed? Thank you. You're ahead of me. Before we move on to the next, Councillor Lear, are you intending to leave the room? Thank you very much. Okay, item 37.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Item 37 relates to the Bourne Recreation Ground, and the Council owns the Bourne Recreation Ground, which a local benefactor wishes to donate a significant sum of money to in order that he will enable the redevelopment of the pavilion and leisure facilities at the site. A local community group has been set up and planning permission was actually granted for the new pavilion back in February of this year. So the council actually intends to grant the community group a long lease so that the group can undertake the works and manage the pavilion, and that this will obviously be dealt with in a later executive report. The council has actually been advised that the best way to proceed is to appropriate the land for planning purposes. The council in order to undertake this process, would advertise its intention to appropriate the land and invite any representations regarding this. Any representations will then be considered by Council before moving to the next stage in the project. I commend the two recommendations before you to Council.
Councillor Coburn.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to be honest, I didn't know we had a recreation ground in the Bourne. We have the Bourne Green, and on the Bourne Green we have St Martin on Green Church, we have the Bourne Show, and every Friday night it is awash with families and young people. And the pavilion is used, as you'd expect in the Bourne, as the bar. Unfortunately, because it is so old and tiny, the bar actually spills out, but basically it is one of the most well-used facilities in Farnham. I know it happens at Rowledge and other places as well, but Friday night on the Bourne Green, if you haven't been there, I recommend that you come along, join in the sport, have a drink, have a burger. It's all there. And if Grandpa takes the children, I'm told he has 2 burgers. They don't always tell me about the beer. You know, this is such an important facility, such an important part of village life. And it sounds as though we're appropriating a huge amount of the village green. I'm sure you've all been looking at the map on page 479 at the end. It took me a long time to find it, I have to be honest. The reason this building has to move forward is it is taller. And round the Bourne Green we have some wonderful copper beeches which have been the bane of certain people's lives, and they have spent years trying to get them raised and lifted and have the crown lifted. And now, because this pavilion is larger, we have to move the pavilion forward in order to accommodate that and preserve these copper beeches, which are a mixed blessing. I think in the whole time that this has been going through, I may have had 3 people who said they didn't like it, it was too big. And I have to be honest, it will affect 1 or 2 of the properties, but we looked at it from inside their gardens just to get a full effect. But the benefit that this will bring, it is just quite extraordinary, and I'm just so pleased when you see these facilities across. I can only speak for Farnham, I'm sure it goes on elsewhere, to see the young families enjoying this. So please, I urge you to support this recommendation. We are just so lucky that we haven't been having to spend 10 years fundraising to get this replacement pavilion. We have been gifted it, as said in the report, and it will be well used for many, many decades to come. That I can promise you. So I do thoroughly recommend this. Thank you.
Councillor Round.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure it's an excellent proposal. I enjoyed reading it. I'm sorry. Particularly the historical aspects of 1857 and 1876. May I draw your attention to paragraph 37.14? Maybe I don't understand it. Provided the area concerned does not exceed 205 square yards, which equates to about 209 square metres. I don't think it does. A square yard is much less than a square metre. Have we got the figures wrong? And if we have, does the land exceed it? I'm sure someone can look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I agree with everything Councillor Coburn has said, and I understand the 10 years, but the 10 years could be taken in trying to get the lease sorted out. We are not renowned for doing our leases quickly. And so I would urge the officers to make sure that now we've agreed this, we get on and at the appropriate time get the lease done and dusted so that they can get on and build.
Any further contributions? Would you like to sum up, Leader?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. To Councillor Round's point, we will ensure that that point is clarified on the legal documents. And to Councillor Frost's point, we've, to my knowledge, I think we've been working on this for about 3 years because I had it when it was my portfolio. It's taken a while to get to this stage. However, just to reassure all members, including the councillors for that area, officers are aware of the time frame that's needed and are working exceptionally hard to ensure that they meet that time frame. Thank you.
So we move to the recommendations 30 and 31 on page 182. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. We now move on to part 2.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Part 2, matters of report, starting with item 38, which is the Executive Forward Programme. Moving to item 39, which was Treasury Management activity across 2015-16. And then item 40, which is the in-depth review of the Meals on Wheels service and the report of the findings of that review. Thank you.
I believe Councillor Else wishes to speak.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This report sets out the findings of the Community Overview and Scrutiny Meals on Wheels Subcommittee and the proposals for the development of a future community meal delivery and visiting service. The number of people taking up the current frozen reheat service has steadily decreased over the last 5 years. And whilst it is a discretionary service for Waverley, supporting a meal delivery and visiting service for residents is high on the list of corporate priorities, as it helps to promote and support health and well-being amongst our less able and vulnerable residents. It contributes hugely to the ability for people to remain independent and in their own homes. It was clear throughout the review that apart from the nutritional aspect, for many of the clients, the social contact element of the visit was vitally important. Social isolation is a huge component in health deterioration. It's therefore proposed that discussions take place to develop an alternative replacement fresh cooked meal service prepared by some or all of the 5 major day centres in Waverley. The intention is that the new service is delivered within the Council's £30,000 annual grant. In addition, the service would work with the current group of Royal Voluntary Service volunteers for meal delivery and social contact. The aim is that following the result of these discussions, a new service is up and running by the 1st of January 2017. My thanks go to the members of the ONS Review Committee, to the officers for their support throughout, and for this very well written and concise report. Thanks also go to the many volunteers who have provided this invaluable service in its present form for over many years, and who have indicated that they will help us to take the new service forward. We are of course grateful to the Royal Voluntary Service for their continuing input, and it's also important that we recognise the day centre's early interest and enthusiasm for the proposed model of delivery with all the possibilities which will stem from that. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Leader?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I think we all echo the comments made by Councillor Ells, and it really is excellent to see that this is moving forward, and we do have actual firm plans in place now. There's been a period of uncertainty, and it's good that that has now been removed, and we can really get on with this and deliver a new and fit for purpose service to our residents. And as Councillor Ells said, a huge thank you and recognition to so many of the volunteers who are involved and work tirelessly in this area. The item following that is item 41, which is Performance Management Report for Quarter 4 of 2015-16. And then the item 42, which is Service Plans for the year end. Item 43 is an application to, or rather approval to submit a planning application for the erection of ball stop netting around the Badshot Lee Recreation Ground in Farnham. And the final item on the agenda, most of which is in exempt. So if members wish to speak to it, I will need to go into exempt. But it's around a property matter for Farnham Town Football Club, and it's that the football club wish to surrender their existing lease and be granted a new longer lease, which will also allow them to expand the club and access more opportunities for funding, and that is detailed in the exempt papers, and I commend that also to Council. That concludes, Mr. Mayor, if no one wishes to comment on that, the minutes of that meeting. Thank you.
Since it was a Part 2 item, you can't comment on it anyway. So that concludes the minutes of the meeting of the 12th of July. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. We now move away from the thick second pack back to the original agenda for the minutes of the standards panel held on the 13th of June, which Councillor Goodrich will present. I believe that's the yellow papers.
Mayor, I have pleasure in presenting the report of the Standards Panel, the meeting held on the 13th of June 2016. I have a seconder.
Pleased to second, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, there's one item in Part 1 which relates to the recommendation on page 109. The Members' Code of Conduct and the Planning Code of Conduct, Good Practice and Arrangements for Investigations were all set in 2013. Since that time, lessons have been learned from complaints that have been received by our former monitoring officer. And so what we're wanting to do is have a review of those codes to increase clarity and also to give the new monitoring officer something to do. So I recommend the recommendation on page 109.
Would anyone care this issue? No, in that case we go straight to the recommendation. Number 1 on page 109, is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Goodrich.
There is one matter in Part 2 which is just for information, and that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Are those minutes agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. We move on to the purple pages, page 111, which is the minutes of the Audit Committee, which will be presented by Councillor Gray. Councillor Gray.
Thank you. And I've been given dispensation to stay here and not disrupt you, so don't think I'm being lazy. I'm pleased to present the minutes of the meeting of the Audit Committee held on the 21st of June 2016, and I have a seconder.
Pleased to second, Mr. Mayor.
I have one item for Part 1 which requires a decision this evening, and this relates to the terms of reference for the committee for the year 2016-17. Can I refer to you to the minute on number 6 on page 112? And these involve some very minor changes, which is updating policies referred to, and the change to the annual governance statement from consider and recommend to approve. And that was based on officers' input into the update of the terms of reference. Are there any speakers?
I rather think that's my job. It doesn't look like there are any, so let's move to the recommendation, which is number 1 on page 112. Is that agreed? Back to you, Councillor Gray.
Thank you. I have received no request to speak on any items in Part 2, and that concludes my minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Are those minutes agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. We move on to the Licensing Committee, page 153. Councillor Inchbold.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to present the minutes of the Licensing Committee held on the 7th of July, and I believe I have a seconder. Part 1, the statement at the bottom of page 153 is a lie. There is an item in Part 1, scheme of delegation vehicle plate exemptions. There is a demand in the borough for chauffeur-driven prestige cars, particularly over in the Farnham area, which is close to Farnborough Airport. Normally, these are just almost nodded through by the committee, so it does make sense to delegate the power to officers, subject to consultation with the chairman and vice chairman of the committee. It will save time for members, it will save time for officers and applicants, and the Council's prerogative so far as determining policy is protected by the consultation process. So I do commend it to Council.
Are there any people wishing to speak? No, in which case we move to the recommendation number 1 on 154. Is that agreed? Agreed.
I have no speakers in Part 2, Mr. Mayor, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Councillor Inchbold. Are those minutes agreed? Right, usually when we get to the end of those reports, we've come to the end of the agenda, but not tonight. Item 12, Public Footpath, Hurlands Lane, Dunsfold. Members, this is a procedural item because the Council is required to approve the diversion of rights of way. In order for this footpath diversion to be completed, is the recommendation set out in the agenda papers agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 13, there is a vacancy on the Licensing and Regulatory Committee due to the resignation of Councillor Stuart Stennett, and it is proposed that Councillor Anna James be appointed. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. There are no exempt items to consider. Thank you for attending. This meeting is now closed.
Please rise whilst the Mayor leaves the chamber.